behind me here, I have the AutoGuide 2017 crossover of the year. It's the Honda CR-V, and we picked it that year because it's an all-around really good package. It's spacious, comfortable, practical, and efficient.
Yeah, but behind me is the 2018 AutoGuide Utility Vehicle of the Year winner, the Mazda CX-5. And it won because it's so refined, and it feels like a luxury vehicle at a mainstream price point.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you finish, but I've got the front runner for the 2019 crossover of the year, the Subaru Forester. And it does everything your cars do, but better!
This Honda CR-V we're in is powered by a 1.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder with 190 horsepower and 179 pound-feet of torque. It gets power to all 4 wheels through a CVT. Fuel economy combined rings in at 29 mpg, and cargo capacity rings in at a huge 37.6 cubic feet to a maximum of 75.8. Something that is a bit frustrating is the infotainment screen. It's a bit dated and it's not really that intuitive, and it could definitely be more user-friendly and just look a lot fresher, but having Apple CarPlay and Android Auto helps to fix that. But this turbo model we have really gives it the right power, and the CVT doesn't get in the way, and it's probably one of the better ones out there. It just drives pretty well and does everything you would expect it to, and it's really easy to live with in general, and it feels pretty refined. The only complaint I have is that the CR-V feels a little bit slow off the line and when passing, but that isn't a huge deal. Listen, the Honda CR-V is a really awesome crossover. It does everything really well. It's really well-rounded, but I'm gonna get a little bit of hate for this. I think it is pretty boring and it gives me no joy at all. The good thing about it is that a car like this doesn't have to do that. The way I see it is that it's kind of like a meal replacement drink. You have everything you need to survive, but perhaps doesn't have a lot of flavor, and that is totally fine. So this Honda CR-V has a little bit of a leg up on the other two because it has 2 available engines. There's the 2.4-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, but the 1.5 turbo is the one you want because the base engine is slow AF. What the CR-V does do really well is the family stuff. So it's got a ton of little cubbies where you can store things. The doors open really wide, which is great for people who have to install baby seats and stuff like that. It has some fast charging USB ports in the back, a massive cargo capacity, and it's just really, really comfortable too. Honda Sensing also comes as standard equipment, and that's Honda's suite of driver assistance and safety technology, so you get stuff like blind spot monitoring and collision avoidance, which is really handy. A couple other impressive features that are worth mentioning is that the CR-V has adaptive cruise control, which is really handy in stop-and-go traffic, and a heated steering wheel, which I love in weather like this. In the end, the CR-V is a really good all-around car. It's fuel efficient, it's spacious, it's comfortable, and it's really easy to live with. It's not that exciting at all, but it doesn't have to be.
The Subaru Forester comes with a 2.5-liter boxer engine, as you'd expect. It makes 182 horsepower, 176 pound-feet of torque, and it's all routed through a CVT transmission with 7 fake sort of manual speeds. It gets 29 miles per gallon, has 8.7 inches of ground clearance, gets 107.8 cubic feet of passenger volume, and 33 cubic feet of trunk space in the back, or 70.9 if you put the back seats down. All in, you're looking at $35,270 for a fully loaded model. This is the 2019 Subaru Forester, and from the outside, it might look a lot like the 2018 despite being brand new, but there's a very good reason for that. Subaru has kept a whole lot of glass, and importantly, it's the only crossover here where you can put your arm at the correct angle on the windowsill. See, that's important stuff that they're thinking about. Other important features are the driver focus system. That's a lot like Subaru's EyeSight, but it faces the driver, and it can get a picture of your face. It does a lot of interesting things, like it'll make sure that you're looking at the road, it'll make sure that you're not looking down at your phone, it'll make sure that you're not asleep, and it's got a bunch of different sort of warnings for you to make sure that you're not driving dangerously. It's a little bit too edgy. I mean, I was looking for a parking spot and the car was constantly yelling at me, telling me that I was focusing on the wrong part of the road. But It's also a thing that I'd like that other people have, if that makes sense, so that's okay. The other interesting thing that it does is it will take a picture of your face, and instead of having seat memory and sort of mirror position set up based on keys, it'll do it on your face. So when you get in, the car recognizes you. And that's actually a really handy feature that nobody else is really talking about. Maybe some really high premium luxury manufacturers, but nobody in this segment. And honestly, it's a better solution than the key, because it means you can just throw your partner, whoever, your wife, your husband, the keys, and they can get in and have it not crush them like the trash compactor and the Death Star. The car isn't just smart though, it's also really clever. It's got a bunch of interesting little things, little touches. Like in the back, it's got a step right in front of the back seat so that you can get up and grab whatever is on the roof rack. It also has a thing where it will turn off the air conditioning on seats that aren't occupied. It uses the airbag sensor to check if a seat is empty, and then it just won't send air conditioning back then. That saves on MPG, and it's actually something that I always worry about. Like, am I just warming up the back of the car for no reason? So this manages that. It's also got a second little screen up top that just has constant information. So, you know, if you need to change the radio station or whatever, you don't lose the time of day, the temperature that the car is at, or your pitch and your yaw angle for some reason. I mean, not all of the features up there are super important, but there's constant information up there. I will admit that there are some flat spots. The sunroof, for instance, goes way too far back to be a manual one. I'm a reasonably tall guy, but I'm pretty sure that Jody wouldn't be able to send this all the way back. And if you're a regular person who has regular things to do, and you're trying to do that while you're driving, that's not ideal. And also not quite as good as the Mazda is the driving. I mean, it feels a little more immediate on throttle, but the steering is more dead, and it just feels less tight and driver-oriented than that. I mean, otherwise, though, it's huge inside. It's got a whole bunch of visibility. Overall, though, I think it's a better package than the Mazda, because that's way too small for a real family. You can't fit anything in there. And the CR-V is less interesting than my stories about traffic. So overall, I think this is a better package. It's sort of interesting. There's a lot of space. It's nice to drive. It's got a fairly nice interior, and it's got some really, really good safety tech.
This is the new Mazda CX-5. Under the hood is a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine that makes 187 horsepower and 186 pound-feet of torque. That's mated to a 6-speed automatic, not a CVT like the other two vehicles here. Combined, it'll earn 26 miles per gallon. And when you open up the liftgate, you'll get just over 30 cubic feet of storage. When you fold down the rear seats, you get almost 60 cubic feet. All in, a fully loaded CX-5 will set you back just over $33,000. The CX-5 won our 2018 Utility Vehicle of the Year award, and I absolutely love this thing, although at first glance it's hard to see why. This car isn't the most fuel efficient, it isn't the most powerful, it doesn't have the most amount of space, and it can be kind of stiff and rough. But honestly, once you start driving this car, I think you start to fall in love with it. It's really fun to drive, the steering is fantastic, and you just don't get that in the other crossovers. Additionally, you get a normal 6-speed automatic in here, which I think is a really important aspect of the car. You see, you're used to the regular feeling of gear changes and acceleration. It's predictable, and the car just feels a little bit more engaging. This car is the vehicle that's built for the driver, and that's a very good thing. It just makes you feel a part of the process. However, there is a really big issue when you buy a family car that's centered around the driver. There's not a lot of space for everybody else. In fact, the rear seats are totally cramped. And there's not a lot of amenities for the other passengers in the vehicle. You see, the other cars in this comparison have a ton of USB ports, and they have some storage bins and stuff like that. This car has none of that. The only person who gets special treatment is the driver. You see, I get this fancy head-up display with sign recognition. So I can see the speed limit here, and I can see an upcoming stop sign, for example, thanks to that head-up display. And while that head-up display is pretty fancy, the infotainment system in this car feels really dated. There's no Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, and that's a huge bummer. Additionally, getting things done on it takes a little bit of time. You can only do one thing at a time, and you have to use this rotary dial to get things done, which seems absolutely ancient in comparison to the other cars. Now, this might come across as an overwhelming negative experience for the Mazda, but just take a look at the interior and exterior design of this car. It's really pretty. It's so much prettier than the other two vehicles. I love the leather. I think the design in here is wonderful. Everything just feels sculpted around you, and that's a really special feeling. Additionally, all of the buttons and controls have this wonderful tactile feeling. So yes, it's not as powerful, but it does have some torque. It's not as fuel efficient, but it is fun to drive. And it might not have a ton of space. But there's one big thing going in favor of the Mazda, in addition to its gorgeous styling. It's much cheaper than the other cars in this comparison, and that's a pretty big deal.
We actually had a really hard time picking between the new Forester and the CR-V, and what that means is that Subaru has really stepped up its game because the CR-V is one of the best.
Yeah, I think the combination of safety tech, driving dynamics, and just overall packaging kind of tipped this one over the edge. So have I convinced you that this is one of the crossovers of the year?
We won't know until we do our final evaluations of every SUV that came out, but I think it's a really strong contender.